Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Alex from TexasSteelGuitars.com. In today's video, I wanted to take a little time to kind of tell my story with the steel guitar. I get a lot of people that ask me all the time, either from other musicians or a lot of times people who are wanting to get into the steel guitar at gigs and things like that. I get asked a lot, and I'm just going to ramble on here. I didn't write a script for this or anything, so I'm just kind of just give my my story with this. I get asked all the time, how did I get into it? Because it is kind of it's a very unique instrument, and it's not something that you can just walk into any music store and see. So there is, a shroud of mystery surrounding the steel guitar in general. Well, first off, from the time that I was a young child, I always loved the sound of the steel guitar. It's one of those things that you always hear the term, that thing, that sound. It's an instrument that when you hear it, there's no other instrument that sounds like it. It's absolutely definitive. You can play the steel guitar, a recording of it, to someone who has never even seen the instrument, but they will most likely recognize it. And if they've never heard it, I'm sure that they'll find it memorable, to say the least. So it is somewhat of a mystery. So when I was a kid, I had no idea what it even looked like. And I remember the very first exposure I had to it was seeing a video of Santo and Johnny playing, and that's when I kind of was like, oh, that's what that is. That's what a steel guitar is. I just found it to be one of the most amazing sounding instruments I'd ever heard. Anyway, I had been playing guitar. I started when I was 6 or 7 or so. As I started to get a little bit better, I started learning to play the slide guitar as quick as I could. I started learning the concepts of playing in open tunings most of the time, which was either a G, a D, or just a straight up E major. But it always sounds very bluesy with the electric guitar. I never could quite get that sound I had heard, and nobody had explained to me. This is back before the internet too, so nobody had explained to me like what C6 was, what A6 was, what E13 was. So I didn't have any concept of these Hawaiian style tunings, which give it a big part of the sound. I didn't quite understand those. I went and saw a performance, and I saw a fellow that was playing the non-pedal steel, a guy named Andy Gibson, a great steel player, non-pedal steel player from Nashville. And I saw him play on stage, and he absolutely blew me away. I said, I want to do this. And I tell people this all the time when they ask me, how do you get into it? Well, the way I did it is I got a 6-string lap steel. It was a National, really cool guitar, but it was just a 6-string. And so I've met a few people that showed me a few things and started doing a 6-string version of C6, C-E-G, A-C-E. And that unlocked the old Hank Williams Sr. sound I wanted. A lot of people, they want to hop right into learning the pedal steel, at least the E9 pedal steel, the single neck, and that's absolutely perfectly fine. But I always say, it's a great idea to spend some time on either a 6-string resonator or a lap steel. A big part of what you'll learn from playing the lap steel is your right and left hand technique. The way that you pick it and the way that it's fretted, the technique that you learn from a 6-string steel, a lap steel, non-pedal steel, will transfer very well to your next step up, whether that be an 8-string or a full-on pedal steel or what have you. Granted, it's not exactly the same. The main difference is obviously the amount of strings involved, and with that comes string spacing. So with a 6-string guitar, the strings are very far apart. And when I go back to play one now, even dobro, I can play it, but it's always like, oh man, it feels weird, because I'm so used to playing a 10-string guitar. But having said that, all of that technique that you will develop with your right hand and your left hand can transfer over, and it will serve you very well. And I am not a master of the pedal steel or the non-pedal steel guitar in any sense. I'm still learning new stuff every time I play. I still get blown away when I see these really great players and feel inadequate compared to them. But it's not really about that. It's just another musical instrument, and I just enjoy playing it. I'm not the best in the world, but this is just my advice. All the technique you learn will cross over. And in my opinion, really one of the hardest things about the instrument is your right hand. Once you've gotten the patterns down and you're comfortable with the tuning and the chord locations and the pulls with your feet, that stuff stays the same, But your right hand is the dynamic element. You'll constantly be pushed to do something that's not comfortable with your right hand. So in my opinion, that right hand is really the thing that's going to take you a lifetime to master. Even though you might not think so. A lot of people look at the instrument, the pedal steel, and they see all the pedals and the levers and all the strings, and it seems daunting. But, it's really, look at what the guy's doing with his hand, and that's what you should really be daunted by. I was able to scrape up enough money to move up to an 8-string steel. What I could afford at the time was a National Grand Console, which is a double 8 steel guitar from the 50s. It had no legs. I had to install legs onto it. It had no case. It probably had a case at one point in time, but it was long gone. And that was a really, really great guitar. And that's probably the guitar that I spent the most time with until I got a String Master a few years later. But that's when I really started to learn, is when I got that first 8-string. I spent so much time. Once you get those 2 extra strings, especially with C6, I mean, it opens up so many doors. And now I had a tone knob, and I could, even though the tone knob on that National was not great, it was a 3-way chicken head switch, which I changed to a pot, but it's in a very bad spot, so it's hard to do your boo-wah stuff. But having said that, I made do with what I could. And when I really got that first 8-string, that's when I feel like I really, really started to learn, and I started to learn all the slants. I started to learn, back bending. The string spacing was closer, so I was inching closer and closer to the pedal steel guitar. And then from there, as I started to get pretty good, I started, making a little bit of money playing, and I bought my first String Master.
Stealing is his business. He likes to do his business right.
A big part of me learning the pedal steel guitar was based on the non-pedal steel, and altogether I played that for probably close to 10 years, 7-8 years, I think, before I ever had my first pedal steel. And I remember locally where I live here in Texas, I started having people ask me, hey man, we've got a band and we need a pedal steel player. There's not a lot of guys around. So I would always have to tell these people, well, I don't play the pedal steel, I play the non-pedal steel. And of course they would say, well, you play the steel guitar, right? They don't know the difference. And I try to explain to them, well, it's not technically the same thing, And anyway, if I'm in with a swing band, it worked out great, but a lot of the guys are playing modern stuff and they're going for a more Nashville kind of sound. So I did my first gig with him, and after the gig, I remember the band leader came to me and he said, oh, you sound great, but it sounds off. It doesn't sound the way that we expected it to sound. And I explained to the fellow, well, I tried to tell you, yeah, I play the non-pedal steel. It's a Hank Senior. It's Bob Wills. The fellow told me, well, you need to get a pedal steel if you want to play with this band. And it was a good paying gig too, so I didn't want to lose it. And I said, well, at this point I was still fairly young, and I was like, man, I can't afford one. They're pretty expensive. And to a kid who's, I don't know, what was I, 26, 27, I was like, they're pretty expensive. So anyway, the fellow made a deal with me that he would buy me a pedal steel guitar. and I would have to work it off. I would do a few gigs and not get paid until it was paid for. And so I kind of saw that as an opportunity to get my first, pro level steel guitar. And that guitar actually was a single 10 Sierra. Sierras, I could make a whole nother video about Sierra. They make great guitars. Not for me. They're too heavy. They're very, very over-engineered. I always liken it to, if you open up the hood of an old 1980s Porsche, it looks like somebody took a bucket of parts and just dumped them under the hood. Now, Sierras, they're good guitars, and if you've got one, I mean, you can play that till the day you die. But that was my first pedal steel guitar. And it was an E9, and I had spent all this time playing in C6 and a little bit of E13, so I didn't really know E9. I kind of had to learn E9 on the spot, and I remember they told me, hey, the first gig's on Friday, so I kind of just jumped into the fire and just started doing the gigs. I already had a really good concept of how to play the steel guitar, which goes back to the point of my story. I spent all that time on Mon-pedal steel, I spent all that time on the lap steel, that it made that crossover so much easier. Now granted, if I could go back in time and hear that first performance, I'm sure it was pretty awful. But if I had not spent all that time and only got into the pedal steel with my guitar knowledge, I would have been hindered much more. So to answer this question, how do I get into it? What's a good way to start is, in my opinion, is to be patient. Try to get into it through a non-pedal steel, a resonator, a dobro, and the like, a 6-string lap steel, an 8-string non-pedal steel. Even if you put in just 6 months to a year on it, it'll make crossing over to the full-blown 10-string pedal steel much easier on you. Now, having said that, I know people that play the pedal steel that have never played a non-pedal steel. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but in my experience, if you have the time, if you have the dedication, putting that time in will help you greatly. So that's kind of how I did it. Appreciate you guys listening. This was just my story of how I got into it. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for listening, and stick around. I'll see you next time. Take care.